My name is Lorin W. Wild. I'm 78 years old, 77 years old, and I was born in Garland, Utah.
Tell them where.
Garland, Utah, in my grandmother's home, on her dining room table, and my grandmother delivered me.
Wow.
And before I was delivered, my two sisters were delivered. One's 4 years older than I am, and one's 2 years older. They're deceased now, but that was the spread in time.
Okay, I was born in Salt Lake City in a hospital in the old, I don't know the name of the hospital. It's the Catholic hospital in Salt Lake.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm 77.
So you're the same age.
Mm-hmm. We went to school together.
What did you do for fun as a kid? What was your childhood like?
I was raised in kind of a special area. It was Verlin Park in Layton, Utah, and it was built to house the people who had been in the war. And the Hill Air Force Base was in the process of multiplying and increasing, and a lot of people moved into the area and they needed housing, so the government built Verlin Park. And it was, all the homes were alike, and it was a beautiful opportunity for kids because there was a lot of space, and we were able to play and play sports between the homes, and it was a great place to be raised.
Cool. And what did your parents do?
My father was a fire inspector and at Hill Air Force Base for his entire working career, and when airplanes crashed and whatever, he was called in to inspect reasoning and purpose to help them adjust and prevent those kinds of things from happening.
Wow, that's fascinating. And was your mother in the home?
Mom was in the home for the best part of the time, although she did work outside the home in a grocery store for a period. And yeah, she's a great lady. She was, for the time, I guess, she was a relatively independent woman. She drove a car, and she had a mind of her own, and everybody knew it.
Okay, I was raised in Orem, Utah, till I was in the 7th grade. I was in Orem. I lived right across the street from my Grandma Edwards, and she had the 14 children, and the youngest one is my age, and her name's Janice, so she's my aunt and my best friend, and it made her the boss. She was always the boss. And I had a wonderful childhood. We played dolls, and Grandpa had a big farm, and he had a lot of boxes because he hauled fruit from Orem up to Salt Lake to the Hewlett-Packard. And so we made endless playhouses with those boxes. We made refrigerators and stoves and played dolls all the time. That's what we did. And then in the 7th grade, I moved to Kaysville, and my father took a job teaching at Davis High School. And so then I stayed there till we graduated.
So did you have your father as a teacher?
No. Luckily, he taught auto mechanics.
I had him as a teacher.
Oh.
And he was nice. But yeah.
And your mother was home?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I didn't ever know her to have a job.
Yeah.
So.
Can you remember like a favorite meal that she would make you?
You know what? My mother was always conscious about weight, and so I thought only rich people bought potato chips and store cookies. But then after I learned that my mother just didn't buy store cookies and potato chips. But she made bread all the time, and honest, the meal I remember the most would be a meatloaf. She didn't put a lot of time into cooking. And I didn't like to cook either, but I always made a list every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and made something when the boys were little.
What about you? Do you remember something your mom would make?
My mother was a cook. She was an excellent cook, and I mean, family-oriented type meals. I mean, not a high-level meal type, but there are so many good meals. I mean, beef and pork chops and potatoes and gravy. It was all the home cooking that a guy could enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I didn't know about chip dip, and man, I went over there one night and she was sitting in her chair with a bowl of chip dip and chips.
Yeah.
And then
My
I
mom
learned, I
addicted
loved
Kay
it.
to trash
She
food
did.
and soda pop.
And
Coke.
Coca-Cola, yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's so great. What was school like for you growing up?
We lived next to a gully, so there was a sleigh riding hill. There was a small creek ran down it. There were a lot of places for young men to explore and so on. And then the fields between the homes provided a place for us to play football. And I mean, I remember choosing up sides and playing every kind of sport there was. And we walked to and from school together. It was great. With regard to school, you know, I didn't pay too much attention to school. But there was a cinder block schoolhouse. The grade school was nearby, and we walked to and from it. And there were probably 150, 200 kids in it from the 1st to the 6th grade. And yeah, I went to all my young school life there. And then from there, we walked again to our junior high school. It was built right nearby as well.
So did you interact with any of the veterans that came home at all?
A lot of the young men that I was friends with, their fathers were military people. My father was in the Navy, and from the time he was released from the Navy until he died, he was Hill Air Force Base employee. And a lot of people came and lived their lives out there.
Did he ever share any stories with you about the war, being in the Navy?
Dad spent most of his time in sick bay. He contracted a disease that they called the undulant fever. And he spent most of his time on board ship in a hospital. And when he was released in Seattle, my mother went there and stayed with him in the hospital there until he was able to come home. I don't recall exactly, in fact I was a baby at the time, but I've never been told exactly how much time it took before they were able to come back to Utah. But I lived with my grandparents and that while they were gone.
Wow. Where was he stationed when he contracted that disease?
He was in the Aleutian Islands. Never got off the ship. So, during his term. And I think he was there for maybe a little over a year.
What was school like for you, Kay?
I graduated from the Spencer Grade School in Orem, and two things that I remember really very clear about it was that on the Christmas holidays, they had the grade school had two big staircases that came from the second floor, and we would stand on there and sing Christmas songs, and I loved that. And then if you were late, you had to check in with the principal, and Janice and I were late quite a bit, and the principal would just laugh at us and say, "I know, your dad said the prayer this morning." That's what he'd say to Janice, because Grandpa's prayers were really long, because he named everybody, and so that's kind of the two things I remember.
That's cute. Do you remember a favorite birthday present or Christmas present that you got?
Yeah, tell about the bike and the polio, honey.
Yeah, when I was about 10 years old, at Christmas, I got my first bicycle. Until then, I had to ride my sister's bike. It was a girl's bike, and it was pretty tough on me to be accepted on that bike, and I only got to ride it when they weren't riding it. So my first bike came when I was about 10 years old.
That's awesome.
And
Tell about it.
Kay wants me to talk about the fact that I had polio when I was 10 years old.
Well, how you got your bike, what happened on Christmas Day?
Christmas Day, I went in and we had company, and my mother, and the bike was in the house because it was snow covered outside, and she said to go to my room and bring out my new bicycle. And when I brought the bike out, it tipped over and I fell with it, and I couldn't get up. And they realized that I had a problem, and the doctor came to the house, and he diagnosed me on the spot as having polio from the neck down.
Wow. So what were your symptoms?
Paralysis. I couldn't move that was kind of the onset. I fell and I couldn't get up, and they brought me back up, and from then on it just multiplied in seriousness until I could hardly move. And I was hospitalized for some time, and they put me under a special care of exercise and hot baths and so on. I missed the entire second grade, I think. The teacher actually came to the home, taught me, and I was fortunate. It left me with some disability, but not a great deal. I was still able to play sports and so on, and I had paralysis left in my one leg and my one shoulder, but I've been able to live a normal life from it. Wow. Actually, very fortunate.
Yeah.
But your symptoms before, wasn't it the night before you went to the movie with Kay and Diane, and they wouldn't wait for you?
I recognized that I had a problem when we visited some neighbors on Christmas morning, and my sisters were never faster than I was, but in this particular case they walked faster than I could, and I realized that I was ill. And it was about 2 days of this continued illness, and Mom just felt like I had some symptoms from eating too many sweets and so on. And but it just got to a point that I was pretty miserable.
So did you even get to ride your bike?
What they did, no, I didn't at that time, but the bike was set up on a stand in the house, and it was part of my exercise program for the months that I recuperated. Dad set it up on a stand so I could actually get on and ride it in place.
Wow. What about you, Kay? Favorite birthday or Christmas present?
I remember in Orem when everybody was getting the dolls in a trunk about this big. I've seen them in antique stores now. And then you would just open the trunk and the doll would be standing here, and then you would hang all of her clothes there. And I remember when I got that. And then I can remember my dad, I was young. I was 4 years old when he got home from the service, but before that he sent me 2 dolls for Christmas, and I still have one of them. And I remember when the dolls and the doll buggy came to the house. So that was fun.
I'm going to get even with you. Tell her about rheumatic fever.
Okay. Well, that yours was a Christmas story. I did in the 2nd or 3rd grade get rheumatic fever, and I spent almost 1 year of the 2nd or 3rd grade, I don't know which one, in bed. You couldn't get out of bed and walk around in that. But when Lorin had polio, everybody was getting it, and we were all so afraid that we were going to get polio. And we couldn't put our feet in the ditch because we just played in the ditch, the irrigation ditches. But after everybody started getting polio, then we couldn't get in the ditches and things like that. So, and then rheumatic fever, I don't know if it was going around or not, but I was really sick with it and a lot of people, it leaves them with some heart damage. It didn't me at all.
Oh, so you both got lucky.
It softened her in the heart.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember World War II at all? Were you affected by it?
Mm-hmm. Big time.
She remembers more than I do. Tell her.
Tell them when you're first saw. So go ahead.
Well, I don't remember much
when your
about it
mother
other
left?
than I lived with my grandparents through part of it. And I remember when my father came home from being in the hospital in Seattle, I don't remember a lot about talk or any of the newscasts or anything of that nature. I don't think we were protected from it, but the news and so on, it just wasn't what it is today. And I remember talk and conversations about people in the area that had been in the service, and for one reason or another they'd been killed or they were heroes or whatever. But aside from listening to adults talking about it, I don't really feel like I was affected or really knew much about it.
Yeah. And how old were you at that time?
I was born in 41,
Oh, okay.
so about the same time the war started.
Yeah, pretty
So,
young then. What about you, Kay?
Well, my father left later than most people because he was married and had a child, and you could get deferrals. But then he went ahead and went in, and so I was a little bit older, and I remember three things really a lot about it. Mother, we rode back on a train clear to Maryland on the East Coast, and Mother went back there to stay for 3 months before Daddy was shipped overseas. And I can remember being on the train. And then then there's a lot of pictures of me back there, but I don't remember that. But of course I remember getting my buggy and stuff in the mail. And well, Daddy was in the service. My mother worked at Geneva Steel or is it in Ormond, or not Provo? And I remember the daycare center, when she would leave me at the daycare center to go to work. And I was the only child. So I was born in July, and then Pearl Harbor was bombed in December.
Okay. So where was your dad stationed?
Daddy was in Europe, and is it Switzerland? I can't remember, but he repaired the cars and the tanks and everything that would come in, so he wasn't out in riding combat a lot. But he had a gun that he always saved, and from the way he got it was they were driving some trucks through, and the enemies came and stopped him, and they ripped the door open and was going to pull Daddy out, and he kicked him and grabbed his gun and drove off. So my brother Donald has that gun today.
No way. Wow. And how long was he gone for?
He was gone for at least 2 years, but like I said, I think he was still over there for a while, even after the war ended.
Yeah. Wow.
So.
And I'm assuming you guys are too young for the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
We've been depressed a lot.
We aren't too young for very many things, though, but we did miss that one.
Now the fun part. So you guys grew up together. Did you know each other? How did you initially meet?
You feel that you'd...
Okay, in the 8th grade, I saw Lorin in our science class, and he sat over by the window, and I liked him. But he liked the girl that sat right across from me. And so I liked him in the 8th grade, and then we had an 8th grade dance at the junior high, and Lorin drove the car. Did you have a driver's license? He took his father's car and drove her, and then I was in the same car with his best boyfriend. But at the dance, she left with someone else, so Lorin was left alone. And then after that, he asked me. So
I have a serious love history.
So we're dating in between the 8th and 9th grade, part of the 8th, the last part, and the 9th grade in the summer. And then we went all the way through high school.
So you stayed together that whole time?
I know.
Wow. And then what happened after that? Did you propose?
Yeah, I had a few.
Yeah, she proposed.
My parents were helping me date kids that was in the ward here and that, so I had a few other dates. But I always liked Lorin, and we always just knew we'd get married. And did you ask me how, like, when I got a ring, or
Yeah.
did you ask me that? So we went to the IHOP in
Salt Lake.
and he handed me the ring under the table. I don't know why. And
I spent so much money on it, I was afraid somebody would see it and steal it.
but we graduated in May, and we got married in December.
Wow.
We were both 18. I know,
So
I
young.
know. And he did. He made such a good living that he always made more than my dad, who was a school teacher.
Wow.
So it worked out.
So
Your dad was a school teacher.
Yeah.
Where did you get married?
We got married in my mother and dad's living room, right up on 2nd East, 229 South 2nd East, right up here. And my grandpa, who was the stake president, married us. And I do want to say a funny story about that. When I was 73 or 4, they put me in the young women's. And the first thing that we did, they said, bring your wedding pictures and your wedding story to the church, you know. So, and I walked in, and there's all these giant pictures of people in front of the temple in color. And my wedding pictures are like this, and they're black and white. So, and they weren't in front of the temple. So I kind of did feel bad, but so I just had a black and white pictures not in front of the
Black and
temple.
white wedding.
And our wedding reception was right here in Kaysville in the Rock Chapel on 2nd East. So.
Any other things to add?
I think it was an experience maybe worth talking about on our wedding, with a wedding night. It was, of course, it was the first part of December, 4th of December, and it was the same night of the Fulmer fight, boxing. He was Gene Fulmer was a favorite son of Utah, and he was a boxing champion, and he had a championship fight that night. And so we stood at the church waiting for people to come in.
In our reception line.
And it looked as though no one was going to come to our wedding. And it turned out that everybody was out in their cars on the radio listening to that Fulmer fight. So when that was over, they all came marching through, and we relaxed and felt like we were loved after all.
That's funny. What is your favorite quality about Kay?
Favorite quality about Kay? Holy cow, that's difficult to segregate all the reasons I love her so much.
Yeah.
She's persistent. I love that in her.
The kids call me stubborn because I won't use a cell phone.
She's domineering. I love that.
Oh
in
my
her.
gosh.
No, she's
That's
just
a lie.
she's just an easy, wonderful lady to.
Because I'm nice.
I'm proud to be a part of her life, actually. I actually feel a little bit guilty because when we were getting married, her folks, she didn't add this to her comment, but in fact, they weren't that happy about our relationship. They weren't that crazy about me. I could never figure out why.
Mm-hmm.
But they had her signed up to go to Provo to the BYU. And at the time, all you had to do was sign the papers and you were accepted at the BYU.
Can you believe that? That's all you did.
But they had her signed up, and I went to their living room one evening and announced the fact that we were getting married.
Because I was telling him that we would get married, and I was telling Mother and Dad I'd go to BYU. It's kind of scary.
So anyway, I feel a little bit guilty because I probably am the reason that she didn't become a Rogue Scholar.
Yeah.
And kept her from going to school. But after a short time after we were married, I realized that she wasn't that interested in school, and she definitely wasn't interested in a working career. So it turned out to be good for her because she was able to be a mother and a housewife, and one of the best, if not the best.
Glad it turned out. Okay, what's your favorite quality about Lorin?
You know, we were so young. We were being 18. it would have just really been hard, except that that was the year that Sperry, what is it, Sperry Rand? They moved into Utah to and had places built to put man on the moon. And Lorin is an artist, so he went to drafting school the summer that we got out of high school. He went to drafting school. And when we got married, he had really a solid, good job. And I have never had to work. And then he went to college for a lot of years. But he's always made enough money that I've never had to work, and I never wanted to. In high school, in fact, I told my brother 2 nights ago, I went all the way through Davis High School and didn't get an A. I was straight C. And I had no interest in going to school. But in 1959, if you wanted to go to BYU, your parents had to drive you down and sign you up. And Daddy took me down and signed me up, so.
You know that Rogue Scholar comment that I made?
That wasn't nice.
I was kidding.
That was a dig. It was.
Oh, at least you guys can joke about it. You guys have been married for 59 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to maybe a newlywed? What makes a marriage work?
Okay, I'm going first, because I know.
That's what makes it work, is she gets her way.
You know what? It's so simple. If people would just realize that I think I learned this at home and with the Edwards family, is that you just have to be nice to people. You just have to be nice. And that's been my motto, just be nice.
Good one.
But I don't know, because I stayed home, I just took care of the boys in the house, and he just worked, and it worked for me.
Anything to add, Lorin?
Only that you know what she says is true. I think she's coaching me not to kid. She
Yes,
wants me not to
yes,
make
because he
jokes
does
or
it too much.
But,
I want to say it right now on film.
one of the things that makes it work is I think we're conscious of one another's feelings to the point where we try to correlate our actions to keep peace and happiness between us. And she cares about me, and I care about her.
We have never had like a screaming fight in each other's face. I hate confrontation. We just never have we?
Mm.
So I don't know.
I'm the same
Let's
way.
be nice.
That's
I hate
great.
confrontation.
So then after that, children came along. Can you talk about the first time you held your baby in your arms? What that was like for you?
Mm-hmm. You know what? The first one I had, I never even got to hold him. This was in 1960, and in those days, babies that had problems were put in isolettes, and all you did was look at them through a window. And Joe was born with these bowels on the outside, and so he had surgery, and then we just watched him for 27 days through the window, and we never even touched him. And plus, he only weighed 4 pounds. And then we went over on a Friday night, and he was coming home Monday. And we were watching through the window, and a lady, the nurse, was feeding him, talking on the phone with the bottle propped under her chin. And he aspirated, and we saw it, and she drew the curtains, and then we were just standing there. We weren't worried or anything, you know, and I don't know how long it was before, but she came out and handed him to Lorin. And so we passed him back and forth, and we didn't realize that he was dead. She just ran down the hall. It could never happen today. Could never happen today. So I remember turning and watching her run, and we passed him back and forth, but we didn't really realize. So that's the first time we held Joe, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an experience that would never happen today. In fact, I didn't even think about this till a lot of years later. She was in the hospital. Had she called for help, then it might have turned out different. But She didn't call for help, so.
So she just ran away?
Yeah, she handed him to Lorin and ran down the hall. I can still picture her running down the hall. And then, I don't even remember after that, some doctor, they came up to us and took us in a room and told us. And so that is the first time we held him.
I might tell a story, though, that
Yeah.
I think it was the next child born. We lived in Arizona at the time, and it was born in the Good Sam Hospital. And Kay was reluctant to go into when she was due, and having pain, she was reluctant to go into the hospital. And part of what the problem was she had the Joe occurrence on her mind, and so we sat.
I was afraid it would happen again.
We sat out in the parking lot, and sweat pouring off of my forehead, with her sitting there saying she was in pain and it could be any minute. And finally, I got her into the hospital. She conceded to go, and I finally got her in there. And things were managed a little bit different then with births, but they put her on a gurney, and I stood by her side for a few minutes, and then they sent me up to register her, and then told me that I should register and then go down to the waiting room for fathers. And when I walked into the father's waiting room, it had been maybe 20 minutes, and a lady came on the speaker and said, "Mr. Wilde, you have a son." And so I didn't have to sit with the men and wait and wonder. And they all looked at me with daggers in their eyes. I was the lucky guy that just walked in and found out that I had a son and all was well, and turned around and walked back out of the waiting room.
Except that isn't Greg's story, that's Ronnie.
Ron's.
That's Ronnie Joe's story.
That's the second living
That's
son. I thought I might be wrong on that.
Yeah.
Wow.
When-
So you were laboring in the car that whole
I
time?
was. When we had babies then, you laid in a room and you didn't have anything. Then as soon as it got really close, they put you on a gurney and ran you down the hall into the delivery room. And then gave me a mask, face mask.
So different these days.
It
Yeah,
is
oh,
different.
I
The
know
husband
it.
can-
In fact,
Yes.
fortunately at the time they didn't let the husbands watch the birth,
Yeah,
and I'm okay with that.
you're fine with that. How did you get through that difficult time together of losing your son?
I don't know.
Had we brought him home and lived with him for a time, it might have been a lot harder. But having never had a child in our home, I'm sure made it easier. And then our faith in the hereafter and so on, and the fact that we could have more. In fact, she was told shortly thereafter by our doctor that the best thing she could do would be to have another child soon, because it wasn't her fault, or it wasn't anything that we did wrong during pregnancy. It was just one of those things. So we hurried and had 4 more sons just to prove it was possible.
I want to say, after Joe was born, we waited 2 years. So I'll help you. But
But how many children did we have by the time you were what?
I had 5 boys by the time I was 28. But when the second one was born, Greg, I was scared, and I was scared every time. But I thought the nurse was being kind of rude to me. So I just told her about my other baby died, and then everybody started being so nice to me.
Good.
But anyway, I
Oh,
didn't have.
sympathy card.
Yeah. And I didn't have any more problem at all. And then, so Greg was 2 years later. And then that was in 62. And then Ronnie was born in 66, Ryan in 67, and Cliff in 69. So Ron was still 3 when I had Cliff.
And the 4 following were perfect, and
Yeah.
they're still perfect, right?
Except when I had my 5th boy, we didn't know if you're getting a girl or a boy, So when I had Cliff, I kind of threw a fit. And it wasn't
very
my
hard
fault.
to live
it was
with.
because I had the stuff.
She kept wanting a daughter,
I was hollering at the doctor.
and the doctor, his name was Smith, oddly enough, in Scottsdale, Arizona. And he came out and he said, Mr. Wild, if you're willing to have 10 children, one of them might be a girl. He said, but if you're willing, if you'd like, I'll help you adopt one. So that was the end of our childbearing years.
But I'm so glad. I've loved it ever since because
She's the queen. She's the queen.
I just say the boys.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have to.
Yeah.
And boys are, everybody tells me they're easier to raise.
And we have some great daughter-in-laws.
Yes, and granddaughters too. And when I go out to eat with my friends, though, they always get 2 or 3 calls from their daughters, and the boys never call me. Of course, I won't carry a cell phone, so anyway, you should take this part out.
You want to talk a little bit about your profession, how you got into your career, and if you enjoyed it.
Tell them about that certificate, and there you go.
I'm taking instruction here from my wife. As she said, I started my career as a draftsman, but I always wanted an art education. So what we would do is we would work in the drafting profession, and I made good money. In fact, became a designer and was later accepted as an engineer. But I always wanted to be an artist. So I would work for a year or two, we'd save money, and then we would quit and go to school for a year. And we did that for 2 years at Weber State here in Utah. Then I graduated from Phoenix College in Phoenix. And then I went to Arizona State University in Tempe. And I worked at Motorola as an engineer. But always wanted to be an artist. And I retired early to pursue my art interest. In part, at least, that was the purpose, and I was able to do that. And since then, I've enjoyed painting, and I've been involved in art galleries and been able to sell a few paintings. And
Cool.
so I've met my desires, you know, the mechanical engineering side and also the...
Tell us what you did at Motorola.
What Kay's trying to get me to talk about is the fact that when I was at Motorola, in fact, when I worked at different places, we were always engineering for the military in different ways, side-looking airborne radar units and specialty guns, ammunition systems, and like blasting, you know, Hercules powder and things of that nature. But at Motorola, we were centered on communication system for the Apollo missile and the Apollo venture to the moon. And as an engineer at Motorola, I had a crew of men work for me, and we sat in the cafeteria and watched the landing on the moon. And they gave me a pin and a certificate that I was instrumental in. And I think they only gave 2 or 3 million of those pins out.
That's amazing, though, that you can say you took part in that. And I really respect that you followed your passion. I think that's really admirable. What is your favorite thing to paint?
I enjoy painting people, human interest type things. But the most fluent, or the thing that probably has brought me the most income with respect to it, at least, is painting buildings and homes of historic nature, you know. But that's over now. I don't do that anymore.
So do you still paint?
Yeah, but it'll be human interest stuff from now on. It'll be people and animals and things of that nature. And
Cool.
there won't be an emphasis on the sales side of it anymore. It'll be more of my interests.
Cool. Do you take photographs and then paint it, or how does it work?
I usually work from photography.
Cool. That's really cool.
He did these houses
Yeah,
behind
that's
us in
amazing.
watercolor. It was from a book in England, and I love houses in England, so he watercolored those for me.
That's really cool. Have you traveled places to photograph?
Not for that purpose, but as an engineer, I probably got to see a good part of the world. The Pacific Rim, all the countries, Japan, and Korea, and all the countries
Holland.
that direction. And over in the European area, I've been in most of those countries. And I had a crew of men. We actually, I was in the medical industry with medical company. I was a vice president, international vice president for them, and traveled a lot. And then I was also an engineering leader and I had a crew of men, and we installed systems training pilots to fly helicopters and jet airplanes.
Oh.
So I went to the different parts of the world to install those systems, and so yeah.
What was the coolest place you visited?
Oh, that would be hard. You know, the place I like most is the good old USA.
You liked Germany.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to see in the other countries, but you feel the difference when you're in them. And of course I was always there on business, but at the same time, there's nothing like home, nothing like America. Believe it.
Yeah.
One time he had to be in Korea for a month.
2 or 3 weeks or months, I don't know.
And so I went with him, and we weren't in Seoul, where they speak, where people.
Talk about Korea.
we weren't in Seoul, where they have hotels where they're American speaking and things like that, you know.
We're in Chungju, or Chungju,
Yeah.
right in the center of Korea.
And there were never tourists and that didn't go there. And so we checked in to a room, and he was gone every day, all day. And I couldn't watch TV because it was in Korean. And right outside of our hotel room, which wasn't much of a hotel, was a bunch of apartment houses. And every day the garbage truck would play music like an ice cream truck. And it would come down the road, and all these ladies, like hundreds of them, would come out, and they had on the dresses, I forget what you call them, and with a sack, and with the eyes closed up really neat, and hand it to the guy. And I got so nervous, I thought, you know what, you guys could collect your garbage for a week, and then they could come around and get it. But I watched him do that every single day. And the first day I was there, I went for a walk. I was never scared, but I walked past a bunch of people at a bus stop, and I wanted to look at them, but I wanted to wait till I got by. So after I got by, I turned around to look at them, and they were, of course, all looking at me, and they bowed. And so I never made eye contact. If I made eye contact with somebody, then they would bow. And I don't know, it was pretty fun, but I got tired of it.
Yeah, that was a long time.
Yeah, it was a long time. I don't think it was a month. I think
Actually, it was over the New Year holiday,
it's 2.5 weeks.
and we spent some of the time in Seoul in a luxury hotel. So
Yeah.
it was,
And I saw the baby Jesus when he was Korean. In Korea, he's Korean.
all the Christmas displays show the wise men and the Savior and so on in Korean attire, as it should be. You know,
Yeah, their culture.
it belongs to everybody, right?
Board one more time. Just kind of slipped in front. Okay, let's see.
She's running out of things to ask us.
Oh,
No.
I've got plenty. I'm trying to decide which one. What would you say is one of your greatest accomplishments?
5 boys. I don't even have to think about it. It's really the only major thing I did. If you don't work, you don't. So it's the 5 boys.
What was your favorite part about being a mother?
You know what? If I had it to do over, I could be better. Now I would. You know what? It's what I wanted to do. And like I say, I think I always had meals cooked at night and stuff, and I didn't mind running them places. And I just loved him, I guess.
That's all you need.
And the police would call and say, your son's in Coville on a motorcycle. And Lorin, he answered the phone and he said to the policeman, no, they're at home. Everybody's checked in. But our house was large, and the other side over the garage is where they slept. And we found out that they could check in and then leave. So we had some of that too.
Yeah.
I'll see you.
Okay, Lorin, greatest accomplishment.
Oh, my greatest accomplishment is marrying a girl that had 5 boys. Gee, I couldn't even. You know, we've just been so blessed, and living to the age we are, and still being in love and happy with life as it is. Why? I can't pick out accomplishments. Really, being a father is probably the thing I prize most. Husband and father, greatest accomplishments.
I love that. Do you guys have any, other than painting, do you have any hobbies that you enjoy?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Huh?
Lorin. Okay, I love handwork, and ever since we moved up to Wanship, I found a friend up there that liked it also, and we did it all the time. And right now, my favorite thing is I'm hooking rugs, and I'll show them to you. And I love rug hooking, and if I sit down, I'm working on it. So I love to do that.
So handwork meaning
Like we embroidered samplers, and I knitted a sweater and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
And I have a granddaughter, Ruby, that I asked her if she wanted to embroidery when she was little, and she just said, I'm not the embroidery type, Grandma. But Sarah and Maddie embroidered
A little bit.
for me a little bit, but nobody liked it. But
That's neat.
and then hobbies, you have hobbies, do you?
Yeah.
Besides art?
I guess at my spare time, I used to, when I was younger, enjoy hunting and fishing, but I kind of outgrew that. Now we ride a 4-wheeler together, so we like to get out into the mountains together, and I've always enjoyed building. We've designed our own home, drew the plans and built our own home, and we've modified every home we've ever lived in. And building and
He can build and
Art
fix anything.
building and art, I guess, in our 4-wheeler, right? Our interests,
That's awesome.
our mutual interests.
That saves you a lot of money too.
Yes.
Let's see. This is kind of abstract, but what would you say is the definition of love?
You know what I think it is like really caring about the other people's feelings. Before Lorin, I always consider what Lorin would want, and it's because I care about his feelings, I think.
Yeah, that's the most important thing, for her to care about what I want.
I don't know.
No, being able to take instruction is one of my strengths. No, we just,
The boys will know the truth, so I don't
Yeah.
I'm not worried.
we care about one another enough to give and take and enjoy life together.
I know where Jason gets his dry sense of humor.
Yeah, it's Lorin, yeah.
Okay, do you have any last stories, words of wisdom, if you want to share your testimony or anything that you would like to say to your posterity?
You know what, I was raised in the church down in Orem. My grandpa was the stake president, and up here my dad's been the bishop and everything. And I can honestly say when I left Orem, I had never even met people that weren't LDS. I mean, that's just the way I was raised. And so always had a testimony, I think, because of my dad. I watched my dad so much. And just the other day, I read a thing about a story about how a priesthood blessing saved a life. And I have always had so much faith in priesthood blessings. And I was talking to my doctor once, and I said, I wish I'd married a doctor, so when we go camping or something, he'd be there. And he said, well, as long as you have the priesthood. And I thought about that. It's a comfort to me to be around someone who has the priesthood and can give a blessing. And the church has just always been so much a part of my life that I think I've always had a testimony. And I know there's different things that come up about things in the church, but I feel like it's the best way to live. And when I go to church and sometimes and feel a spirit, then it makes me so much happier. I think it does make my life better. And right now Lorin's serving in Apple Tree as the branch president, and I love to watch his interaction with the people over there. And it's just a way of life that I love, and I'm going to try to live it to the end. and so I do have a testimony, and I do want to I still am working to get to know the Savior better, but I do have a testimony of the Savior and our Heavenly Father. So.
I'm surprised you didn't, as the way philosophy say, be nice.
Yeah.
That's always been her philosophy of transfer.
I'll show you something in a minute that's funny.
I guess in my case, the people I learned from, the most important messages in my life were probably from people of faith. Judy's father was one of them, and I admired him a lot.
My name's Judy Kay.
Judy Kay. And another was my father. My father was never a religious person. In fact, he was a member, but he was not endowed. And he always said that he could think of no better way to raise a family than within the church. And he didn't do that, but he felt like that was the right thing to do. So I learned something from that, mostly from the later years. As I think back on him, he did have a strong philosophy, and he was a very intelligent person. But I can't think of a better way than to show gratitude for the goodness that exists in our lives, than to be conscientious of our Father in heaven and the Savior. And that's my testimony, I guess. The strength is in what we receive from Him and the blessings and happiness we get from giving back.
You know, Lorin's father said one time, he said, even if the church isn't true, it's the best way to raise a family.
Yeah.
So.
Really great advice.
Something to hang your hat on.
Yeah.
You ever heard the church thought of that way? Something to hang your hat on.
Well, perfect. Anything else, or do you feel like we covered it all?
Okay. I love my boys and my family.
Ditto.